Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on, YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a very interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This hulking monstrosity is the Miguron Geddon. The bigger brother, to the also very hulking, but slightly smaller Miguron Arma. Get it? Armageddon. We'll talk about the naming here, which I actually, if you'd like to know a fun fact, I named these knives. I helped Miguron name these knives, and a couple other things. I'm going to talk about it. Thank you so much to Miguron for sending this guy in for review. Actually, they sent both. I will link them down in the description. These are what I would consider to be overbuilt knives, not in the sense that they are somehow like excessively more durable than the average pocket knife. They certainly are thicker, but literally they are excessively thick. This is done on purpose. There is a certain section of the knife enthusiast world, right? If you don't know this, there's a section that loves intentionally overbuilt knives. This market, this group of people knows that knives with excessively thick materials are not knives that are, gaining some weird utilitarian benefit from this excessive thickness. No, they're just literally interesting because they're thick. And sometimes companies like Miguron recognize this and they make excessively thick knives despite knowing themselves that this is more of an inconvenience than anything else. They make them simply to serve that portion of the market. I am one of those people, I've got countless super utilitarian blades, right? It's very easy to determine utilitarian themes when it comes to pocket knives. But as someone who's experienced a lot in the knife world, I kind of like it when knives are just overdone for no other reason than just being overdone. They're fun, right? These are in this class, like this overbuilt class. These are, I think, the least expensive overbuilt knives, especially this one. I would call this one excessively overbuilt. These are some of the least expensive knives in this tier ever, right? These are titanium. They are M390. They're not just thick. They're using premium materials. And honestly, they have decent heat treats on them, but very inexpensive versus their realistic competition. I will link these knives down in the description if you'd like to check them out. It does help my channel when you use those links, but that's entirely up to you. Thanks to Miguron for sending these in. Thanks to my Patrons for supporting me. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex, and at least for the time being, you can also follow me on TikTok at _metal_complex. All right, I'm going to try to get through specs fairly quickly here. This is a big knife, really big in every way. Overall length is coming in at 9. I'm going to say that's 9 1/4. Blade length, that is at least 4 1/8. And your cutting edge is just shy of 4, about 3.85. How about some size comparisons? Any custom scales you find in this section can be found down in the description under Original Goat and others. Up against the Cold Steel 8010 and the 8020.5. This is a huge knife. This is a good opportunity for me to talk about the Cold Steel Triad Lock and other knives like it. Yeah, the Triad Lock is a super strong lock. So if you define overbuilt as nothing else than excessively and extremely durable, just, go to Blade HQ and buy yourself a Cold Steel Triad Lock. They're actually really easy to come across. Despite what some Cold Steel fans might tell you, you don't need to be a part of a club. It's not a secret. And they're extremely accessible. If that's what you're looking for, I highly recommend the Cold Steel Triad Lock, right? But for people who like the hilariously thick for absolutely no reason, this guy will take the cake. In fact, it actually makes knives like the AD10 look a little bit dainty. That's going to ruffle some feathers. Lengthwise, it's also much larger. Let's go ahead and put it up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3. Yep, it's still gigantic. How about up against the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue and the Hogue Deca? Okay, how's the action? Usually these big, hulking, overbuilt knives aren't really easy to manipulate, right? Actually, this guy is super easy to manipulate. The lock bar tension is not nearly as strong as you might have expected. There's also a nice little bald spot under here because this is a lot of blade coming down, right? And, right, I mean, as everybody knows, because it's that thick, it surely is not sharp enough to slice, right? Actually, it's plenty sharp. It's certainly not a laser beam, but and you can see there, I mean, like sometimes that edge is going to have a little bit of trouble biting in, but the edge is sharp enough to bite. So this is, and the reason I'm demonstrating is not to justify this in some sort of serious performance setting, right? Or serious usage setting. It's, if you buy this, don't assume that the blade is not sharp enough to do damage to your finger. The way that a lot of us like to disengage these knives is with one hand, right? So we do this. If your finger is out here and this thing comes down, you will definitely put a serious mark in your finger, right? Now, it's not going to slice like the Opinel. In fact, I would say most knives are going to cut better. But it's sharp enough to cut, right? So, yes, it is sharp. And it's got, part of that is because it has a little bit of a hollow grind right here. But it is not going to be, this is not going to be a performance cutter. You try to cut something dense like, I mean, honestly, just regular cardboard. You're pushing the entire thickness of this blade through it, right? But anyways, back to the action. The blade is heavy enough, much like the Arma, the blade is heavy enough to where gravity is just going to allow it to drop, right? But also, Miguron does a great job building their knives. So the pivot is also very, very smooth. It's actually really comfortable to disengage. And my suggestion to them was large barrel studs. I said, make sure you put something comfortable on there, something that you can get a little bit of grip on. Don't put pointy studs on that thing, right? People are going to want to do that. You know, I think they had tossed around the idea of making a flipper. And I said, you've already got a flipper, do thumb studs here on this one. They also, you know, I told them to put the fuller in. I did not design this knife. They showed me their, you know, kind of the early renderings. And I said, you know, maybe consider putting a fuller in the blade where you can utilize it to deploy it. I think it might be kind of fun to do that, even though it's totally unnecessary. But it also adds a little character to this portion of the blade. A lot of people are going to point out that it looks like a Medford because the distinguishing features of Medford are oval and big, right? Yeah, it does look like a Medford, but again, those personality traits in Medford knives are not super unique. It's just big knife and oval or rectangle. So yeah, they don't own those things. But I can see why some people might think that. Let's just dissect a little bit exactly why we think that. But outside of that, this has a lot of unique features, including its general size. I mean, this is legitimately one of the thickest production folding knives ever. I'll go over a list of things that you might think are thicker and are in fact not. It sounded so bad. Anyways, I think the action's actually really good. It's not the best for reverse flicking because the detent is really set up to accommodate for thumb stud flicking, but you can see here it does it. It's super satisfying. You can also reverse flick it. It really is just a bizarre thing. There's just so much weight coming out of the blade here. Let's do carry profile. Let's do some funny stuff. Picking this up against the Spyderco Para 3. Oh my gosh, that is gigantic. Length and height up against the PM2 and Para 3. Now, this is where we do have to kind of talk about this because there are people out there who get confused by this stuff and assume that because it is so monstrous and hulking, it must be incredibly durable. And if the folding knife is incredibly durable, then it's obviously the most suitable tool for literally any task in any scenario, right? No. Insert, makes me think of that SpongeBob episode. Wrong. But no, not at all. It's just, it's seriously, it's just supposed to be funny, right? But it is really cool. It's fun, right? It's kind of one of those things where it's, man, it's huge. Why is it such a crazy thing to hold? Oh, you know, we get like that. I think it's okay to point out that, you know, it tickles the senses in just the loveliest way. It's kind of hard to explain, but it does. But anyways, this is going to be a pocket knife that you're either going to have to be completely delusional or just accept that it's going to weigh you down. It is huge, right? It's gigantic. It's way bigger than the PM2. Folded up, I mean, I guess it's close, right? But it's tall and most importantly, it's thick. You're going to have to dedicate to this, right? This isn't really something that most people will ever adapt to. It's something I usually say when you carry knives, if it's slightly bigger than what you're used to, you'll adapt to it, right? That's when we're talking about a reasonable thing. This is a completely unreasonable object. So most people, unless you're the size of the mountain from Game of Thrones, you probably won't adapt to this naturally. You're probably always going to be aware of it, right? You can kid yourself, and that's fine, but you're going to need a belt. Let's go ahead and actually measure the blade stock thickness. Let's point this out real quick. So the Miguron Arma, because a lot of people are going to bring up, different knives. This is not as thick as the PMP Alpha Beast. That is not the thickest folding knife of all time, but I do believe it is the thickest continuous production folding knife, right? So the crazy half-inch thick Reese Whelan knives or the Anthony Griffin stuff, like those are custom knives. Those are not production knives, right? So the PMP Alpha Beast at 0.4 inches, or it's like 0.395 or something. It's about the thickest. This guy here, because people are going to want to bring up the Medford Praetorian tie. The T is the thin guy. That's about 190 thousandths, and it's got 125 thousandths thick titanium. The tie is a 1/4 inch thick, right? And then it's got 190 thousandths or so thick on the scales. The Arma is very close to the Praetorian tie. I know people are going to say, you mean the T? No, I mean the tie. It is literally almost the same thickness, right? So if you're wondering, how does my Medford Praetorian tie compare to the Geddon? The Geddon will dwarf it. It is much, much bigger. It is much thicker. Much thicker. People want to say cold steel SRK. Yeah, the cold steel SRK is even thinner than this guy. That's only about 190 thousandths on the spine. There's a lot. I mean, cold steel doesn't make anything this thick. I know there's going to be people aggressively trying to compare here. This is 310 thousandths. It's huge. It's ridiculously thick. Not that you're really gaining anything there, right? But if we're gonna, if we're gonna do a pee-pee contest here, then this is what we're working with the Geddon. It's huge. Enjoy whatever you carry, for whatever reason. I understand this review's getting out of hand, and I'm joking around, which that's absolutely all it is. But there's no reason to judge, how good your knife is by how thick the blade is. We do that, right? We laugh at each other. But this is a hilariously thick blade. It's ridiculous. And they asked me, they said, do you think that's too thick? And I said, well, yeah, of course it is. But that's what makes it cool. The thing is that we've learned that what we thought was a dead trend, regardless of what you think, what we thought was a dead trend from 2012 is very much alive. The problem is that up until recently, we didn't have any production options. We had a few absolutely insane custom or semi-custom knives that were just way too expensive for most people and completely unobtainable. The Praetorian tie, famous. Number one, not many people are going to pay for that. Number two, even if they can, they were hard to get, right? So I said, yeah, there's a market for this stuff. It's not the majority, but there's certainly a healthy market for it. We just need some production options. And that was proven, I would say, pretty easily over the last 4 years with a lot of the few overbuilt production knives that we have from some of these Chinese companies willing to give it a shot. And it's, there's demand for it. So it's fun. But anyways, getting lost in the weeds here. Let's go ahead and weigh it. How much does this thing weigh? What are we looking at for materials? We're looking at titanium, contoured and textured titanium. Some of the nicest and most satisfying, big, thick chunks of titanium that have been beautifully, almost like, it's weird because it doesn't look like an object that should have any type of refinement or luxury or class applied to it at all, but it does. It actually is really nice. The texturing is beautiful. The machine work is beautiful. They've gone all these extra steps to do this. There's also a ton of internal milling here, which is great, but I mean, make no mistake, it's still very thick. What's the blade? M390? Great. So, for those of you who are like, thank God it's not something basic like D2. Yeah, sure. It doesn't really matter what the blade is, truthfully, because it's so crazy thick. You're never going to get the optimal performance out of whatever composition is used here. It's already classing itself out of capable folding knife because the blade is so thick. But for those of you who just really need your money's worth in terms of materials, which I completely understand, it's M390. So there you go. It weighs 11.15 ounces, which is actually lighter than I would have guessed, and I think a lot of people would have guessed, right? What's the Rockwell hardness on that M390? Industry standard 59 to 61. And normally I would say, why not 60 to 62? But then we have to remember the geometry is absolutely decimating the potential performance of the blade, even if it were heat treated higher, right? So in this case, like, I really can't say that it matters that they get it up higher. They got it to 59 to 61, and that's fine, right? There's no way that there would be really hardly any difference in performance. It's just so thick that it's going to make, ultimately what I'm saying here, it doesn't matter what you do with this knife. It's going to be made less convenient than using something better suited for the cutting task. I mean, almost any pocket knife, any fixed blade, any blade in general is going to be better suited for whatever cutting task you're going to throw at this. So, but there you go. I do appreciate Miguron at least, doing that. That was kind of them. Let's go ahead and get out my tools and do a hardware check. As per usual, my tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use on this channel. It's also in the pinned comment section. So I told him, I was very specific. I said, with these guys, we really want the big oversized fasteners. And they did it. They did it. Thank you so much. We have a T15 pivot. And now these guys down here, I believe are T10. That's what I requested. That's what I said people would be really happy if you decided to do that. And they did. In fact, the pocket clip screws are T8, but the body screws, not the lock bar insert screw, but the body screws are T10, which is really cool. So, people who like to take their knives apart, knock yourself out. These are deep fasteners. They take large bits. Go ahead, right? As long as you have the right tools for the job, you should be good to go. Really, really cool. I love that. We already did blade stock thickness. I think we can go ahead and move on to the meat and potatoes here. As somebody who, if you look through my library, you'll know that I've uploaded a lot of content. I've got, I think, over 4,100 uploads, legitimately. And even before that, I was handling lots and lots of knives. I've handled inexpensive knives. I've handled hyper expensive knives, multiple thousands of dollars, practical knives, impractical knives, gas station knives, right? A lot of joke stuff, a lot of designy stuff, art stuff, pretty much everything from every corner. So I have a good idea of what the purpose of the design was. And this is a design that's made to make people like me smile. People who, maybe have a lot of, or, maybe you have all of the last decade's most practical, best ever EDC folding knives, right? You've watched every video on YouTube. You've got every video in everybody's top 10, right? You have all the coolest stuff. And you're like, you know what? I kind of want something that's just completely and totally ridiculous just for fun. I understand that. If you think like that, if you've seen it all, right? And you want something wild, sometimes for those people, the overbuilt stuff does it, right? That's, again, that section of the community is hard for some people to wrap their heads around. Why? If the idea behind this particular tool, which is a cutting tool, right? If the idea behind it is to cut and cut efficiently, then why would you want a version of it that so poorly does exactly that? And I'll tell you the answer to that is the humor and irony. It's just because it's funny, because it's ridiculous, and also because that caveman part of our brain, when you're holding a big, oversized, robust version of something, there's just something about it. It's just, even if you hate it, there's something about it. These knives put smiles on people's faces. I've got a few buddies that come over here to my office, some local friends, and they like to go through my collection and just see what's new periodically. And I have that oversized case that was that's offered by Nowpack. They have a Pelican case. It's like a short, fat one. It's real deep, and it's got the big, oversized foam inserts. And that case, every time I open it up, it's just they're just flabbergasted, right? And people like to pull those things out and open them up, and they're just like, oh my gosh, these are so ridiculous. I've never seen anything like it. And there's some sort of weird draw for a lot of people. Not everybody. You don't have to like this stuff. I'm not saying that if you don't like this stuff, you're not a true knife guy. We're all different, right? But for some people like me, seeing things like this and holding them especially, it's just, there's something that puts a smile on your face. And this one in particular, the Geddon, does that. I told Miguron, I said, you need to go thicker than what we normally see. Like if you guys can hit a price point, because I told him, I said, the big deal with your brand is you're able to put these premium materials that are generally heat treated, the blades are heat treated well. You're able to bring this stuff to the table. They're practical designs. They're simple but practical designs, and they've got good price tags, right? If you can bring that to the table with not just an overbuilt design, but like something that's absolutely ridiculous, right? More ridiculous than most folding knives in the market, and at a better price point, you will stand out. The Miguron Arma did that. And so when I knew that as many people enjoyed the Arma, which is one of the easiest to carry overbuilt knives, right? As big and thick as it is, it's one of the easier ones to carry, right? So if you're really wanting to, if you don't want to stick around for the rest of the video and you're wondering which one do you recommend for, like, if I'm actually going to EDC it, well, this one, right? It's still huge. It's still enormous, right? But it's much easier to carry. It's shorter. I think it's a more practical ergonomic design anyway. And it's got a flipper tab and the opening slot, so you can do all that. It just makes more sense. But this is one of the most ridiculous things the production knife world has ever seen. And it is also vastly less expensive. The only thing that's bigger and thicker, like I said, for production knives is the PMP Alpha Beast. The very first PMP Alpha Beast, not the Beast, the PMP Alpha Beast, right? That came out a while back, not too long ago, right? But before the absolutely insane inflation that's occurred recently. That guy was in D2. Now, it was made by Riot, but wasn't contoured, wasn't textured. It was D2, $500. $500. There's a couple other overbuilt knives floating around out there, but all of them are pretty expensive, like Max Ace's stuff. That tends to get pretty pricey. And that's titanium and M390. This guy, I'll just go ahead and say, the Arma was $300, which was amazing, right? Find me another quarter-inch thick M390 blade with hulking slabs of titanium that only cost $300. The Geddon I knew would cost more, but I thought it was amazing that they still, because this is much bigger and much thicker, still with the contoured titanium and the texturing, it's so beautiful. Milled clip, titanium backspacer, they still kept it at $350, which is just mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. Now, if you're not into overbuilt knives, all it looks like is just hulking chunks of the same material that you can get for sub 200, right? Which is true. It's just that, but much more material. There's enough material here to make at least 2 regular knives, possibly 3 titanium and M390 knives, right? So if you want to reduce it to just materials, look at it that way. There's enough of these materials to make 2.5, possibly 3 M390 and titanium knives. And you're looking at $350. I've never seen anything else in the production knife market that is priced like that. So as an overbuilt, intentionally ironic monstrosity, it is an incredible price. As a knife that is expected to do knife things, it is wildly expensive, right? It's important that we distinguish there. But I don't think most people are going to have an issue with understanding what this is. Amazing fit and finish. I also suggested that they texture it this way. They had a couple of different things. They were going to do some lines, and I said, just do the diamond texturing. We've got lots of knives with diamond texturing. We just don't have anything that's quite like this. It is really like the perfect combination of all of the premium luxury like preferences that I have with really nice pocket knives. It's the best combination of that with the stupidly hilarious overbuilt theme, and I love it. I love it so much. I love the way the hardware looks. The little lines here, the way they divided it right here. I love the handle. It's cool. It's very industrial. Just almost looks like something that would be in Warhammer 40K, right? Or maybe like World of Warcraft. Just crazy thick, chunky, but it looks good. Like I love the straight profile. It honestly does make me think of the SRK kind of. It's almost like the Cold Steel SRK. Or no, not the SRK. I'm sorry, the SK5. I think that's what that's called. Yeah. Is it the SK5? Maybe it is the SRK. Anyways, it's their really thick folding knife. It's like that and the Medford Marauder mixed together. But this is just like way nicer than both. We have a satin flat, like a hand rub satin flat, and then we have a compound, like a belt satin compound blade. The tip is ridiculously robust. I honestly don't think you're not going to snap the tip on this. I honestly think you would bend out the pivot before you would snap the tip. I mean, that is crazy. It is unbelievably thick, and it's made more robust with this compound sort of. The flat carries out so far, right? And there's so much thickness out to the tip. It's just absolutely wild. It says M390 on this side. Nothing on this side. Honestly, really beautiful to look at. Just the Miguron logo on the pivot. There's some functional jimping back here. And truthfully, that choke up spot here, it's a dream, man. This huge, thick slabs of titanium that are so beautifully contoured and textured. You hold on to this and it just melts into the hand. It's awesome. It feels incredibly secure. I have no doubt that I would not, if I actually pretended that I needed this, right? Like, oh, I need that. Like what I do with a knife every day, I definitely need all of this, right? If I pretended. The one thing would be for certain while I was using it and laboring through whatever simple task I would be trying to apply this on, I would at least be comfortable, and I would also not drop it. There's no way. The lock-in on this is great, whether it's back here or up here. It's just super comfortable, man. I also feel like Geddon is the right name for this. What's the reason for the split names? I can't remember if they had originally planned to do one knife or if they had planned to do both, but when it was just one, when they were kicking around the idea of making a big hulking knife, because they had noticed that some of Max Ace's big overbuilt stuff and some of PMP's overbuilt stuff was pretty popular. Not with everybody, but with a lot of people. So we kind of want to try that. So what should we name it? And I said, I don't know, call it the Armageddon, right? I've never heard of a knife called that, or, if so, not very many. He said, well, something about Amazon and keywords, and they don't really like things that have to do with or that sort of nod towards violence. And they had two designs. And I said, you could do two different overbuilt knives and call one of them the Arma and one of them the Geddon, right? It sounds cool and it kind of matches. And they said, okay, cool. So that's about the story, but it's not super complicated. It's also kind of, an unintentionally funny marketing strategy because people who own this guy will probably feel obligated to buy the Geddon. So I hope we don't see a surge of two-part named knives, right? As if if you own one, you kind of have to own the other. You don't. If you own this and you're happy with it, you don't need to buy the Geddon, right? And if you want to buy the Geddon, you don't have to buy the Arma. That's just how it ended up happening. They had two designs and we split the name up. I'm still not convinced that they needed to. I don't know that Amazon would have really had a problem with that name, but that was my suggestion when they said they didn't want to do that. So, but I think I think it fits really well. That's what they look like. So I like that the inside of the fuller here is almost like a dark chalky, it's just like a darker color. It's cool. Add some contrast. There's another version of this where they have gray PVD on the handle. I tried to convince them to do everything in gray PVD and one in black PVD. I said, you've got so many that are satin and tumbled. And they said, well, the problem with that, everybody wants the M390 to be harder. And it doesn't matter as much on these ultra thick knives, but it brings it down even more. And I said, oh, you're right. When you have a coated blade, you got a gray PVD or a black PVD. As cool as it would look, it would bring the Rockwell hardness down even lower to 58 to 60, which again doesn't really matter, but it does matter enough to a lot of people who are going to be spending the money on this, regardless of the fact that the thing is already not a convenient cutting tool and that the hardness of the blade probably doesn't weigh very much on that. People still don't like to see that number, and it probably would turn people away. So I can understand that logic, I guess. That being said, I think it would be really cool if you just bump the numbers up higher in general so that when you did PVD coat your knives, they didn't fall below 60. Mostly what I'm talking about are their knives and their regular line, which are very practical and much thinner. If you're new to Miguron and you're like, I'm going to stay away from this company, they make crazy big. No, actually, the vast majority of their knives are extremely practical. Very much thinner, much better cutting geometry. So Miguron, I would prefer that you would try to hit your M390 normally from 61 to 62. And then if you PVD your blades, it brings it down only 1 point so that you're looking at 60 to 61. That's a good way to make most people happy. And I don't want to speak for everybody, but an all black Geddon or an all Battleship gray PVD Geddon would be absolutely sick. It would be so cool. I love the all gray. I think it looks awesome, but some of these other colors, you could even mix it up and do bronze hardware or blue hardware. I think people would love that. We've already seen it with some of your other stuff, some of the budget stuff. The colors would really look cool. So I would consider that. I think that would be really neat, and I think a lot of people would really enjoy it. But anyways, the backspacer, gigantic. And here's why. It's because the frame is so wide, because of the blade, that if the backspacer weren't here, you'd run a much bigger risk of accidentally touching the edge, which is sharp enough to cut you. Now, truthfully, you can touch it up here. The backspacer, if they ran it any further, because of how the blade angles this way, the edge would smack into it, which is why it stops right here. This is one of those knives that if you buy it, you probably are aware of this. You're not going to like buy it and be like, oh, oops, and then cut yourself and then call the company and like yell at them. Like, come on, understand what you're buying. Like you probably, logic would tell you that there's separation here between the scales. Now, yeah, they could have taken the backspacer and made it U-shaped, right? But I feel like there's a general kind of understanding between the buyers of this stuff and the makers of this stuff. Like everybody's like nodding and winking at each other, and you kind of have to be there, like mentally, to buy this stuff, right? So don't go screaming at Miguron if you buy this and cut yourself right here. Let me tell you, normally that's inexcusable to have it on a normal sized knife, right? And if it's so close to the edge you're cutting yourself, like, yeah, that's a problem. Here, like, just calibrate is what I'm saying. But I'm glad that this backspacer is here covering most of it. This will alleviate the vast majority of risks, or mitigate the vast majority of risks. There's a lanyard triangle, so that's great. No mounting position for lefties, sorry. And Miguron, you should really work on that because some lefties like overbuilt knives too. The pocket clip will carry this knife fairly deep in your pocket. You'll only have this rectangle sticking up out of your pocket. That's fine. I would comment on the clip being too long, but truthfully, I don't think it really matters. And honestly, the pocket clip is shallow enough and the rest of the knife is thick enough that I don't really notice it. I'm too hung up on the fact that the thing that I'm holding is this, right? Steel lock bar insert that doubles as the over travel stop. That's great. A huge, absolutely gigantic stop pin. Same with the Arma. They both have, it doesn't look like it, but they're both massively oversized compared to a normal knife. That's great. No secondary lock, no pins. Probably would have been cool to have a pin, right? Just to go, you might as well go overkill. That's what Max Ace does, but there's no pin. Regardless, the thing locks out like an absolute bank vault. I mean, I try to reserve that bank vault lockup. Reviewers used to say that for literally anything, including me. That doesn't really mean what it used to anymore, right? This, when I say bank vault, man, that is just so much titanium and steel on steel. It's crazy. The amount of surface contact. And I think the geometry of the lock face is also very good. You can see there, it's the overall percentage is maybe 30%, but the total amount of material contact is crazy. It does not move. It runs on bearings. There's no lock stick whatsoever. No pivot lash. Incredibly smooth. Mostly it's going to be gravity doing the trick. And honestly, the detent, nice and heavy and clicky. Absolutely perfect centering. Let's be clear. This knife and the Arma are not for everyone. Absolutely not. In fact, they're not for the vast majority of people. If you love overbuilt knives, if you remember the 2012s, that time period, like where everybody just loved the big, burly, thick, crazy knives, and you had Chavez with the original Redemption, that huge knife, right? Absolutely monstrous. And the Praetorian tie, right? And I remember the Reese Whelan fatty slasher. Like, oh, these are so cool, but they're so expensive and they just don't exist. The closest you could get was the XM24, maybe some other stuff here and there, right? There's some other like reasonably thick stuff, but the big, the crazy, ultra hulking is just so far out of reach. If you remember those days, right? And Maybe you're in a position where you'd like to pick something up that brings back those memories. Or maybe you're like, I wasn't around for that. I just kind of like thick knives. These are going to be your best bet, far and away, like by hundreds of dollars. Oh my gosh. And they're honestly made really, really well. $300 for the Arma, $350 for the Geddon, and they'll put a smile on your face. Don't expect them to be incredible tools in terms of just convenience, but they will put a smile on your face, and they're built insanely well, right? For everybody else, like literally everybody else, like if you're like, I don't know if I like overbuilt knives, yeah, this is meaningless to you. There's no value here, right? Specifically, these were made for people like me who just like this stuff because it's funny. And I'm a huge fan of the Geddon. I honestly don't know that I would change any line. I love the Arma. I think it's great. But the Geddon is really like, me. I'm trying to think of me back in 2014. My brain would have actually exploded. This is just so, I would have gone out of this would have been like my absolute dream knife. The closest I could get back then, I think, was the Marauder. I had an original 1/4 inch thick Marauder, and at some point I also bought a Praetorian tie, and they were great. They were cool. But if I could have gotten my hands on something bigger and thicker, then I would have gone out of my way. But even back then I paid, I think $1,100 for the Marauder that I found, which was real crazy. And I know I paid a lot more for the Praetorian, $1,500, $1,600 even. Yeah, I would have been over the moon to only pay $350 for something that was even bigger. Like it was even more of what I wanted, right? Just to hold it and go, oh, God, dang, it's thick. It's just funny, man. Really fun. Let me be very clear about this. This is not a recommendable knife. No, it is not. If you like overbuilt knives, knock yourself out. You'll love it, right? It will go on my favorite knives of all time just because it makes me smile so much. I love this knife. It is hilariously stupid. I do not recommend it. But if you like overbuilt knives, you will love this. So that's where it'll go. It'll also be linked in the description with the Arma. Thank you very much to Miguron for being willing to take risks. I think this is awesome. That's really cool. And thanks for sending this in. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex, and for the time being, at least on TikTok at _metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.